So, yeah, welcome to week 11 of our course, OCA 3780. Um, yeah, in week 11, again, we continue working on the essay. A lot would be depend on how much you guys bring to the conversation. Because I think I'm kind of running out of ideas, except just presenting what I have myself found in relation to food production issue, which is, uh, I guess, kind of commonly adopted by most of us, I guess. And yeah, I mean, I will share all the insights I have gathered with you, and you just feel free to adopt them, incorporate them. If there is anything that you want to incorporate out of the slides, please make sure that it wouldn't be a cut and paste. You just look at them as just a source. We can't unfortunately reference the slides, but because they're not peer reviewed, not already published publicly, and they're just raw ideas. I mean, there could be also problems in them as well. Like you guys, it's the first time that I'm doing this. Unlike you, it's not the last time I'm going to do this. Okay. Yeah. Um, yeah, I remember I promised you to provide you with some documentaries, and this is my very premature ones. It just introduces, because I was focusing on section 3, assuming that everybody else is doing that. So this is week 11. My optimal expectation is that everyone has already done the first draft of section 2, which is the scope and forces and etc. etc. Section 1 being the introduction, of course. And we're into section 3, and section 4 is a small one. I guess it can be integrated into section 3, or it can be done separately because I can see the overlaps. It's about the responses to the problem, and some of those responses are already in the way that true value is produced in whatever sector we have chosen. So it's we want to be flexible. Yeah, I remember I asked, um, I suggested that we focus on a sector within a country, but you can draw on examples from other places. You're just saying that there's not enough examples, for instance, in Australia. For instance, if there are limited examples of indigenous farming or agriculture, um, and more so, but you can find stronger cases outside, especially in Latin America, in Mexico. Also, farmers movements, global farmer movements, international global farmer movements. They are also very interesting one for food sovereignty. I came across a very good one. Actually, I share that with you. I didn't know much about it. And I'm learning a lot. I didn't know about the Australia's Great Artesian Basin. Have you heard of that? It's amazing. It's 22% of the land mass, which is the one of the largest, if not the largest, underground water basin, which dates back to millions of years. And there is a sustainability initiative in order to conserve it, because you can imagine a lot of those agribusiness corporations would be very much interested in extracting it out of the ground, which they did actually in my home country of origin, and the water tablets are kind of empty now because they went for cash crops. The water that gets into the Iranian watermelon to be exported to Arab countries, because they can't plant it, they don't have enough water, and they love watermelon. It's very juicy and sweet. And it's the size of, as if I remember correctly, it's the size of 3 large dams, water going into the watermelon getting exported, which, and then amazingly, the neoliberals in Iran, they blame food sovereignty for it. They say because the country wanted to become sovereign in terms of food production, we have ended up this shortage of water, whereas it's the cash crop. It's sort of those watermelons, kiwis became very kind of cash crop thing, and then in the Middle East, people love it. So why not? So it's not about becoming sovereign or independent in producing wheat. Wheat, the amount of water you want to spend on wheat is much, much smaller than the water that goes into watermelon. Anyway, so yes, so I'm learning a lot, and it's exciting, but I don't want to impose anything on you guys. If you are interested in any other sector, you might have done something maybe in relation to energy or knowledge or whatever, or services, health services. Yeah, the very interesting case you actually put into your assignment, which was about the what was that? The fitness industry. Yeah, wellness. Yes, wellness industry. Yes, which is an interesting one. So whatever you choose, but I mean, it depends. I mean, it depends on your condition. You may be doing 2, 3 courses. You have some extra time, extra interest. You want to do something on whatever interests you and motivates you. But on the other hand, I'm finding the food sector, very easier to do, more information available compared to other ones. It's there's a diversity of actors and forces in it, so you can pinpoint to things that are on the true value side, the ones that are on the fetish value side, definitely, etc., etc. And there's in conflicts and tensions and co-options, and it's much easier to detect them. And I found very interesting, a number of very interesting references that I have started using into the slides, just to make sure that what we are producing can be substantiated and backed up by the literature. And in the last 2 slides of today's lectorial notes, you can find the list there, which are interesting. And yeah, let's maybe just to break the ice, we'll watch this. I don't know, I think it's just a few minutes. It's just an intro. It introduces section 3. Let me know what you think of it. It's very premature. I don't know. I really feel for the YouTubers. You have to spend a lot of time finding the images that matches the content, and then a lot of them you have to pay, and the free ones are not really good. I don't know how they can make money, and they spend a lot of time. I don't know if the YouTube pays them well. I guess they have to have a lot of subscribers. It has to go in thousands to get something from YouTube out of the advertisements that are embedded in their works. And this is another example of fetish value production. The labor goes into that, highly, highly underpaid, and the labor is not commodified. These YouTubers are not employed into any factory or company. They are providing their own labor in exchange for something. So their labor is not directly commodified, but it is reified. And as the result of that, because no one is buying or selling their labor power, the YouTubers' labor power. Okay, let's watch this, and then we can have again. Would you like to have a small group discussions, a step by step, part by part, and then you report back? Before that, maybe if anyone has any updates about section 2, any questions, we'll start with that one, and then the small group discussions on section 3. And then I'll present also what I have found. Hard to memorize everything. I probably end up reading out some of that. Okay, here is my documentary. No, okay, it's an introductory part of a documentary.
Value Dynamics in the Australian Food Production System, authored by S.A. Hamid Hosseini. In the heart of Australian food production lies a struggle, one that pits the generative forces of nature, community, and creativity against the extractive forces of capitalism. This is a story about true value, value that sustains life, communities, and ecosystems, and how it's under threat. Across the land, true value emerges from 4 powerful forces, according to the Aristotelian understanding of causality. The more than human creative power as the efficient cause, where ecosystems and humans co-create to nurture life. The livability of the life domain as the material cause that consists of the conditions that allow ecosystems and communities to thrive. The conviviality of more than human communal interactions as the formal cause, which consists of the shared responsibility, care, and mutual well-being that bind communities together. And finally, the alterity of the prefigurative emancipatory praxis, the force that allows alternative ways of living and farming to resist and grow beyond hierarchical control. But in this land of abundance, a quiet battle has been unfolding since the arrival of colonialism, modernity, and capitalism. Capitalism steps in to extract value, not the true value that sustains life, but a fetishized, distorted version. Through privatization, commodification, and alienation, capitalist systems work to strip these commoning causes of their potential, transforming them to serve profit-driven interests. How does this happen? How does the pursuit of profit take over the forces that once sustained balance and well-being in agriculture? This is where we explore how decommonization, the gig economy, automation, and policy shifts reshape food production in Australia. How the systems of care, creativity, and collective well-being are co-opted, fragmented, and weakened. The questions are pressing. Can we reclaim the commons? Can these organic systems resist capitalist extraction? And how can the final cause, the goal of holistic well-living for all beings, be defended against these forces?
Okay, how was that? Good? Okay. Yeah, I'll keep working on it. If I can make it, I will share it with you. If not, the slides should be good enough to give you some insights. Okay, now everything is animated. Yeah, so section 2. Before we start section 3, anyone wants to talk a little bit about section 2? Everybody has already chosen the sector or not yet? Kind of. Oh my God. Okay. So that means that section 2 hasn't been started yet, or dot points? Okay. How about you guys over there?
Yeah,
About? Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you're working on the consumption distribution side more than the production side.
Yeah. Not exactly sure how to know yet, but
Okay. Okay. And Rory, you were working on food yet? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so if that's the case, I guess we won't have much to discuss for section 3 unless we just have some brainstorming. So section 3, I think I must have already told you that I revised the assignment. So it's I reduced it to 4 sections. It used to be 5 sections. reduce it to 4 sections. If you haven't downloaded yet, maybe it's time to do. If you have done it, but you're not sure if that's the latest version, please do it again. In section 3, I think I must have done a little bit of a more, not changes, but I must have tidied up. So in section 3, there are 2 things that we want to do. On one hand, the true value production side of this story, using those 4 common encoders of true value. And then the second thing that we want to do is that how fetish value is being extracted through primary and secondary abstraction. Now, in doing these 2 elements, we also want to we want to make sure that we address decommonization, because when we talk about fetish value production, a lot of this happens through decommonization, especially the primary abstraction. You remember the difference between primary abstraction and secondary abstraction? The primary one is the one that alienates and transforms the true sources of value into the sources of fetish value. Okay, dislocating individuals and communities and bringing them to urban areas as people, as landless people who have no access to their means of subsistence, and therefore they have nothing to exchange except their own labor power, etc., etc. The alienation and estrangement of nature becomes compartmentalized, transformed into resources. It's that organic ecological integrity is broken. So these are primary abstractions. They actually pave the way for the secondary abstraction. And what is the secondary abstraction? The secondary abstraction happens inside capitalism, inside the belly of the beast. It's when the digestion happens. Okay, so the primary abstraction is when the parasite gets into the host. That's primary abstraction. Secondary abstraction is when the parasite sucks the blood and digests it. So then for instance, in the case of the laborers, the secondary abstraction is that the labor, which is something qualitative, right? Everyone's faculties and skills are very different. And someone may spend, 2 hours doing a job, someone else maybe 10 hours. People are very different. But what happens as the result of that commodity created under control by capital and being exchanged in the capitalist markets, all those commodities will end up making those qualitatively different labor standardized. So that's why you exchange different things that needs different skills and have different uses or use values under the same price tag. So that kind of, see that a kind of a labor becomes abstracted. The labor that was qualitatively different now becomes quantitatively standardized and universalized. So that's why exchanges happens, and that's why money becomes a mediator, etc., etc. So this is the secondary aspect. Marx spent a lot on that because Marx was focusing on productive capitalism, that production relations under capitalism, right? But Marx didn't spend enough time, perhaps very little, on when and where the primary abstraction happens. This primary abstraction happens, as the book says, on the front lines between capitalism and non-capitalism, between the host, between the parasite and the host. So that's where the primary abstraction is. So we would like to, and that primary abstraction is actually the decommonization. when it's mixed up with appropriation. So it decommonizes the sources of true value and perverts them into sources of fetish value production, capitalist value. And now, because we know capitalism keeps moving and keeps changing itself and becoming more and more efficient in doing that. So the gig economy is a new term, kind of new term in the town, although a lot of people argue that has been from the beginning, the precarious work, automation, the metabolic rift between human society and nature, the so-called nature, etc., etc. So these are the things that we would like in the process of addressing those two elements of Section 3. These are three things that we want. Also, legislative and policy changes that favor or unfavor capitalism. So these are the things that we would like to address as much as possible. You don't need to spend a lot of time or overthink. You know, when you're doing the literature review and gathering information, you come up with something. You search for automation in agriculture. You come up with something interesting. I found you actually. I shared them with you. I've shared them with you in the last two slides here, and I'm sure there's a lot more on automation, for instance. This is a very interesting one. You know, digitalization, the influence of AI, those sort of things. So even if you focus on food and you're some kind of interested in AI or automation or whatever, mechanization, you can also give yourself a bit of more room here, if you like. Okay. And then, yes, section 4, which was some strategy. We want to extract some lessons. If we want to counter decommonizations, what are the lessons that we learn from this study? Okay, so section 4 is more kind of a strategic implications about recommonizations. I'm sure there are elements of that already in section 3, because when you talk about true value production, you end up also talking about recommonization, but maybe here it just wraps things up. It's isolate them, wraps them up in section 4. I'm not expecting a very large section, just a small, maybe just what are the implications, you know, that would the takeaways, and the conclusion is again wraps up the whole thing. Again, you don't need to spend just one paragraph, maybe more than enough. Yes. Well, okay, on the issue of on the issue, no one is on the Zoom. No, okay. On the issue of the efficient codes. So in section 3, one way, maybe one standard way of doing section 3 is again to structure it around the 4 causes. So we can start maybe with the efficient cause. Well, the efficient cause, when we are talking about true value, is of course human and more than human creative power. Okay, or creativity or creative power. That one, we can think of examples or places where true value, where actually this creative power plays a role in production of true value through the production of food, okay, or energy, or whatever is the subject. And then the opposite is that what is the mirror image of it inside capitalism? How capitalism does that through how capitalism produces capitalism, fetish value, and what is the efficient cause there? What happens to this efficient cause of true value making, human and more than human creative power under capitalism? And here's where you can address decommonization of it. That human and more than human creative power becomes decommonized into what we call labor, okay? and nature becomes or the ecosystems become natural resources, and both of them lose their agency. Here's the center of the at the center of the efficient cause. What makes an efficient cause, according to Aristotle? It's agency, right? When these factors lose their agency, and it just becomes like cogs in the machinery of capitalism. It becomes, the human creativity or human creative power becomes, as we know, a labor power being exchanged and commodified, or reified. Okay. When people are employed directly by the agribusiness corporations, for instance, agricultural corporations, and their labor become commodified. So through the commodification, they lose their agency. But we know capitalism can also extract value out of labor without commodifying it, only through reifying it. We just talk about those YouTubers, right? They're not employed by anyone, so their labor is not commodified directly. So what are the examples in food production or agriculture that we can think of when the labor is not commodified, but is still being incorporated and capitalist value is being extracted out?
It's specific to like the workers in the industry.
The work that
Is this specific to workers in the industry or
in relation to the industry. If it is inside the industry, if the labor is employed, we know that capitalism has to shortchange labor. Otherwise, it cannot extract profit out of it. The profit is the part that capitalism makes out of shortchanging. Why shortchanging? You can't shortchange your machine. You can't shortchange your buildings. You have to pay for it. Otherwise, you're not going to have them. And well, there's some kind of maintenance. You can shortchange maintenance, but then you have to deal with the problems. That's why, for instance, this university, many organizations, many companies, they spend a lot of money and attention to the equipment, to building. They build new buildings. They do the renovations constantly. They want to look, but when it comes to the staff, they know they are the source of extracting profit out of. The more these staff are shortened, the more casualized, the more underpaid, the more made to work harder, longer hours, the more the system can get profit out of them. But you cannot get profit out of machines. You cannot get profit out of buildings. It's the worker, because it's the worker that adds value to something, right? It's the worker that turns wood to or timber to chairs, or other stuff to computers, or turning raw ideas into lessons and courses, knowledge, new knowledge. So it's only the human creative power that adds value. The other ones, according to Marx, like the buildings and everything else, they only transfer their value. They don't add, because they don't transform themselves. They don't have the kind of agency humans have. But we, in this book, in this course, we attribute a different type of agency to them. That comes under livability. And then it's there in the livability that we talk about that. But I better not to confuse you. So what are the types of labor that is not commodified, yet reified, incorporated, and value being extracted out of them? Think of yourself as a little farmer. and you produce onions, yeah, you're working for yourself. Your labor is not commodified. You're not selling your labor power in the labor market. But you have to sell your onions to Coles and Woolworths, right? So what happens then? Most of the time, you don't have the upper hand over setting up the prices unless you go for some kind of collective action. And they have the upper hand, and they are the ones that control the market. And therefore, although your labor is not directly commodified, but it goes into the onions, and the onions are bought by the supermarket at much cheaper price, and then it's sold back to yourself and community at the much bigger price. It's like the solars that you put on the roof, and then the energy that you produce, and it goes you have to sell it back at a very cheap price to the companies and get their energy for the daytime at a much higher rate. So see that, or you can think of a franchisee, a key cutter in a shopping center. Is the key cutter employed? No, is his or she is possibly self-employed. But her labor goes into the keys sold to the people, but he has to pay for the mortgage on that he has borrowed, the money that he has borrowed for buying the stuff and setting up the business. Also the rent to the company that runs the shopping center, right? So the rent. So this way, he is actually, yes, his or she's, sorry, her labor is not directly commodified, but and possibly the person, the key cutter, thinks that they are working for themselves and they're running their own small businesses. Capitalism is so lovely because they are allowed to have their own businesses. But what happens? They end up paying a lot of money, the bigger share of the income for rent, and they don't have really any upper hand or say when it comes to setting up the rate for the rent. The shopping centers, you normally come every year and say, look, price has gone up. You either stay or you just leave. And if they can afford, if they can actually transfer that extra money that they have to pay on rent to the customers, they do and they stay. If they can't, because no one would buy those, keys or whatever they sell at that higher price, then they have to leave and go somewhere else, find another place that they can survive there. So you see that their agents is gone, even if they have kind of the delusion that they have it, but they don't. So the reason that they have this kind of delusion is because they're not directly employed. Because they're not directly employed. And when you're not directly employed, and capitalism, one of the things that capitalism does is that it tries to make people not directly employed. And that's one of the weaknesses of Marxian approach, orthodox Marxian approach, because it spends a lot of energy on those who are employed, the working class. But the ones that are not directly employed, their numbers has been growing. And because they lack class consciousness, because they're not working around together around an assembly line being employed by the capitalist class, they don't see themselves as the working class. So when they get very upset with the economy, when they see that how economy is screwing them, they grow, their racist nerves grow. They become racist. Because that's because they don't have that class consciousness. They become individualized, and then they say, okay, it's because of the immigrants eating our pets. That's why we are in this kind of mess. And then they become easy praise for people like Trump, or Trumpism, or fascists, or Hitlers, or whatever. So yeah, that's how socialism loses its social base. Unless socialism finds some way to reach out to these people who are not, their labor is not commodified, and see and find a new language, which is very difficult because it's much easier to blame your neighbor who looks different and speaks a different language for your problem as an alien, than thinking of the system itself, which is an abstract thing, which is a complex thing. Um, and Fox News and Sky News and all those media giants, they work on it very well. But socialists don't have any influence, much influence. They don't have social media, mass media. Okay, that's possibly a big footnote here, but I just wanted to make sure that we understand that human creative capacity or power, and more than human creative capacity, they don't need to always be commodified, exchanged in the market. They can be reified and still be incorporated into value extraction under capitalism. So yeah, so this is the other side, and then the interactions between them. And if automation, how would automation affect this? Automation accelerate this, intensifies this process. The more the system is automated, either it's energy production or food production, the more people become casualized, the more become less commodified, more reified, because it's in a spectrum. You can be also commodified partly and reified partly, right? For instance, when you become casualized, of course, you're still being paid and you are directly commodified, but you are the lack of job security would possibly make you to also have some Uber shifts in the afternoon. Or for instance, yes, maybe you're paid to do a tutoring, 1 hour tutoring, maybe you're paid $120 if I'm not mistaken, or for marking if you're a casual academic here. But for instance, you're supposed to spend 1 hour marking, for instance, about 4,000 to 5,000 word essay, which is impossible. You want to read and write feedback, and you can't constantly do that. So you'll end up spending more time. Or if you're preparing a tutorial, you're paid maybe 120 for 1 hour, maybe, but you end up spending half a day, more maybe almost a day of work, and then you divide 120 by the actual hours, you'll see that you're paid only $20 an hour. And there's those extra hours that are not registered and goes into your preparations and etc. etc. They're the reified ones because they're not paid, they're not incorporated. In fact, when we talk about individuals being employed and commodified, right? As you may remember me telling you that the profit is the unpaid part of the wage labor. That unpaid part is actually reified one because it's not paid for. So even the commodified one, the fully commodified labor, is still the profit comes out of the reified part of it, because the commodified part of it is already paid back. So the laborer can come back tomorrow morning. So that you see that it's the reification that underpins the exploitation, not commodification. It's mostly reification. So that's what happens to the human aspect of it. And then if you, the efficient causes again, is related to agency. We attribute agency to soil, water, microorganisms. Biodiversity has an agency of their own. Their agency is different to human agency. That's why we shouldn't equate them. You might have come across with the term flat ontology. Flat ontology is a mistake. Flat ontology means that you think that domestic work or care work that happens inside the households or communities, the work that goes into the factory, and the work of nature, they're all the same. They're not the same. They're not the same type. They're not the same kind of, ontologically speaking. Um, Ontology means the nature of the reality, the essence of the reality, the existence of the reality. Sorry, not the essence, the existence of the reality. Their existential bases are different. The human labor, the labor or the work of nature, the work of women, for instance, they're of the different nature. So we cannot conflate them. We cannot equate them. And capitalism treats them differently. Capitalism partly pays for the productive work that goes into the factory or making YouTubes or whatever, YouTube videos, etc. But it considers the work of nature, it considers the work of the care work of women as the background conditions, and only reifies them indirectly because they're the ones that support the worker, the commodified worker. So yeah, so their autonomy. Okay, but if you're a small farmer and you produce onions and potatoes and you take them to a local market, you don't sell them to Coles and Woolworths, and local people come and buy, and then you use the money in order to buy things that you can't produce. In that sense, you're not incorporated, so you're not reified yet. And unless you pay something for the rent or the loan on your car or the machinery that you use, but mostly you're disconnected. In this way, since you're not fully reified, mostly independent, and you have your own autonomy, and you have created a niche together with other farmers and your customers, consumers, therefore you're kind of by and large isolated from capitalism. And here you're producing true value. You're producing kind of true value. Otherwise, if you are selling the onions to Coles and Woolworths, even if you have produced them, even maybe you have made them even organic, you have even adopted agroecological practices that you look after the health of the soil, and you try to be as sustainable as possible in your little local farm. You're still incorporated into the system if you're dealing with Coles and Woolworths at the end of the day, mostly. And therefore the true value that you have produced is adopted, incorporated, converted, or perverted into fetish value. Okay, so the true value you have adopted sustainable ways goes into your organic onions. Organic onions end up in Coles and Woolworths shelves, and now you have lost your control over true value. You have lost your control over your own agency. You have exercised your agency to some extent, but then you have lost it. And therefore you see that this is a kind of there's an interaction, there's a tension, an interaction and co-option that happens between the two sides of this story. They don't live in completely separated universes. Yes, and that's why we can talk about limitations of sustainability practices. Agroecology, permaculture, regenerative farmings are often associated with sustainability, but do not inherently produce true value unless independent of capitalist extraction, by and large. So that independence is the one that guarantees true value to a state, true value until the end, and circulates. So that's why it's important to isolate yourself, if you're a true value maker, from the value takers as much as much as possible. And we know capitalism, co-ops, capitalist companies have adopted, those methods of, regenerative agriculture. And I have mentioned the names of some of those giant companies, international, transnational, and also national. They adopt them for two interesting reasons. Um, like you remember the open access story of academic publication, right? And these companies adopt agroecology, some of the agroecology practices or regenerative agriculture. And you go to their websites and see they're very proud of themselves doing that, because the first thing first, it's not a kind of a branding issue. They want to say that we're green, we look after, we do care about community, we do care about the ecology, etc., etc. We are also sustainable, and then they put those badges of the I don't know, UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and then we are working towards that. We make donations to poor people, etc., etc. We pay, we make donations to better education, to improve education. So it's a new way of branding. Also, they know that they have their own customers. For instance, if they're interested in, free range eggs or organic fruits and things like that, they have their shelves there over there, so they can also better or more sustainable packaging, in cold and so they know they have their own niche in the market. They have their own customers, and most of those customers are from the upper class and middle class. They can afford, paying a little bit extra for the organic food. um and it has become also another kind of business for the organic licensing. You set up your company to license, you do the investigation. Like, yeah, yes, this is organic. Here is the license. Here is the badge. Go and use it, and then you get money from them. So they have their own um, part of the story as well. I, and the third reason. So the first reason is the branding. The second is um, you know, taking that new niche in the market, of those who are interested in such products. And the third one is, of course, they know they can't over exploit nature. They can't over exploit soil. They can't over exploit water. And they want to prolong exploitation. So to prolong exploitation, it's better to make it sustainable as much as possible. You don't want to go bankrupt because you have already badly exhausted all the natural capacities. So if you could make food out of thin air, you would, but unfortunately you can't. So you have to pay some attention to the environment and to prolong it, to prolong the business. So it's also part of their strategy to stay in the business. Yeah, okay. um Yeah, the regenerative we can if on the true value side of it, with enough cautiousness, um exercise, you can look into regenerative agriculture, ecological synergy, indigenous land stewardship and cultural practices, eco villages and cooperatives, and see how they do the true value production. Biodiversity and creative power, water and soil as active agents. You can talk about them as well. The agency of the so-called nature. Um, and for instance, water becomes just a resource and loses its agency. The agencies of water is in the water cycles, natural water cycles. But when they are broken, that agency is broken. What is the agency of soil? That's a very common term we normally use. What happens when the soil loses its agency?
when it loses its agency of being, I guess, used too much. I don't know what there's a term for it. It's like the soil.
Fertility, right? Yeah, okay. So the soil fertility, the microorganisms in it, the nutrients in it, you know, the topsoil especially, they say that it's losing its fertility and its quality. So it, as you said, it starts to fade, and the soil become less productive. Um, the insect apocalypse is a real thing in reports on that. When you don't have the insect, when you enough insects like honeybees, that cross fertilization and pollination, this is disrupted significantly. And you see that that kind of agency is gone or is under threat. So you can talk about such things when we talk about the efficient cause. Yeah. Oh, these are very interesting ones. I think you should look into them if you're interested. They're global. They're not about Australia, but you can make references to them. The Zapatista communities or movement. The how they actually regain that may go to the recommunization part. These movements can go to recommunization part of the efficiency, the efficient codes. The Cuban agroecology, they put lots of sanctions on Cuba. They couldn't import petrochemical fertilizers, and it turned out to be a very good thing actually for them, because then they adopted permaculture and organic production across their nation, across their country. The Brazilian landless worker movements is a very interesting one. I invite you to have a look. Yeah, commons-based creativity again. You know, again, the way that the land access to land and on the type of ownership. It's an interesting one in terms of having a very significant impact on the efficient cost. Because the more you have control over the land, um, yeah, of course you have the more autonomy and agency you have, and when it becomes collective, even better. So when they turn the land to commons, which means that commonly shared as a commonly shared ecosystem. Therefore, um, not only the agency of humans is preserved, but also the agency of nature. Because when you run a piece of land as a commons, you run it like an ecosystem. Uh, the decisions are made collectively, the rules are set up collectively. There's much more awareness about the protection of that, working in balance with nature, etc., etc. There was a guy, forgot the name, wrote a very famous piece on the tragedy. I think the title was "The Tragedy of Commons." You can dig it up. It's a very interesting one. He tried to explain that if things are not privatized or controlled by the government, as the result of the rivalries between the commoners, between those who are working on the shared land or a shared pond or whatever, um, that place will be soon overexploited, because everyone would seek their own personal gain. And as the result of that rivalry, the commons will be destroyed. Whereas this is nonsense, because he was thinking that everyone is a capitalist in the first place. And then we've got one of the winners of the Nobel Prize for Economics, who proved that was wrong. For many, for hundreds of thousands of years, people were living on commons. The economy was mostly structured around commons. And the collectives, people developed their own cultures that was very protective and conservative in terms of conservation of the commons. Yeah, you can talk about indigenous-led initiatives, etc., etc. Um, Yeah, adopting sustainable practices like agroecology and permaculture is not sufficient if they operate within capitalist structures. I think I already talked about that. The need for commons-based system, only within commons-based frameworks can human and more than human creativity flourish. I mean, at the maximum level, maybe I should say. These systems allow for creativity to regenerate ecosystems and sustain community well-being rather than being commodified. And the limitations of a capitalist integration under capitalist framework, regenerative practices risk losing their potential. The primary abstraction of creative agency commodifies human and non-human actors, repurposing them for profit and yield maximization, which is obvious. Now, on the capitalist value production, so we've got commodification, reification, and fetishization, alienation of labor and nature, reification of and fetishization and appropriation, extracting value with and without commodifications. We talked about that already. And also the interactions, the tensions, resistance, co-option. You can mention these things. Yeah, these are the I think academic sources I found. And some of them non-academic are credible. So you, for instance, you talk about an indigenous movement, an indigenous-owned company, uh, a, a capitalist company that apparently has adopted it, regenerative practices. You can refer to their websites. But I think I should have been clearer in that respect. I think for a 2,500 word essay, we need about eight academic references. On the top of that, enjoy as many non-academic references that are, sources of information or credible or whatever. So, for instance, if you find some websites where farmers are making an argument for some against something, a company, a cooperative that has a list of its principles, and in that list there are something about regenerative agriculture, their commitment to sustainability, their commitment to the communal economy. They promote a small farming, for instance, whatever. The same if you choose energy sector or other sectors. So you can make references to them. I think some of them are academic here that I mentioned, held 2021 or maybe not. Uh, Jonas, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, 2021. Yeah, they talk about permaculture agriculture when absorbed by capitalist systems are reduced. There is even a very interesting term I came across with, and that is here, junk agroecology. So it's again the adopting agroecology, which sounds very good. An agriculture that is very ecology oriented or ecocentric, and then using it in order for branding and for saying that they're showing to the public that they care about the environment, they care about community. So examples from this source, Holt, Gibbons, and Altieri, 2020, 2012, and show how agribusinesses cherry pick sustainable practices without challenging the exploitative structure of global food systems. But also there are examples, interesting examples, especially with indigenous people, small farms that are politically motivated to look after food sovereignty. Those examples are examples of true value production. This fund, junk agroecology, is an example of co-option. The or if you may remember from chapter 4, the so-called civilizing meta mechanisms that the system wants to show it wants to self-civilize itself and reduce the tensions and increase the stability in order to prolong the business as usual. Yeah, I mean, I think we talk about primary abstraction versus secondary abstraction. In terms of primary abstraction is human creativity, for instance, rooted in community and ecological relationships, alienated, transformed into labor power. How would do that? Well, when they dislocate people, when they further casualize people, the more people are disconnected from their own uh, natural and ecological settings and their own ability to have some kind of food sovereignty. One of the reasons that we become very obedient to big business and big bosses, etc., is because of lack of food sovereignty. If each one of us could actually produce our own food, we wouldn't be perhaps we could actually exercise more autonomy. We could just say no to our bosses a little bit more. Um, okay, anything that puzzles you so far? Any questions? Is that everything makes sense? Is that do you think that would we can actually move in that direction? I mean, I couldn't really spend more time on other sectors, I'm afraid, but if that's your if the food sector is the one that you have chosen, it's all for you. Just make a good use of them in the insights. And if not, see if you can find parallels, things that resonate with such examples. If that's, for instance, energy production, I can think of, for instance, little towns, putting money together in order to go for renewable, the traditional ways and indigenous ways of producing heat or cooling down um, the uh, um, the residents, etc., etc. Um, and of course, the corporations, and the co-option they see also big opportunity in terms of expanding their tentacles into the renewable market. Yes, the sunlight is for free, but not the solar panels. So they want to have monopoly in the production and distribution of such equipments, as well as the grid itself, the energy grid. So that whoever controls the energy grid controls everything. Even if people would come up with their own ways of producing the energy, still it has to be connected to the grid, and somehow, unless they develop their own little grid, local grid. So localization is a big thing. Localization is a big thing because it resonates with local needs, and allows people to exercise agency, whether it's in food, whether it's in energy, whether it's in knowledge production, whatever, services, etc., etc. And also to live in balance with their own ecological settings. Um, yeah, and then secondary abstraction happens when people are already incorporated. Human creativity, or more than human creativity, is already incorporated into the capitalist system. Now the capitalist system extracts more, value out of that and abstracts them because it standardized them, and etc. So it's not just the labor that becomes standardized and loses its quality and becomes highly quantified, but also resources. They're also being exchanged on kind of similar prices, um, otherwise, around an equilibrium price tag, they are being exchanged. So no one pays attention to the quality, the ecological quality, the history behind this, the substances that goes into the stuff we use. Um, there we only pay attention to how much we pay and how long it works for us. And so that is, again, you see that efficient cause is gone on the side of the so-called nature. Yeah, primary abstraction in capitalist food production labor is separated from its communal roots and ecological roots, I should say, as well, transforming the commodity, alienating workers from their natural creative roles in food production. Agribusinesses and precarious labor, large agribusinesses in Australia, almost everywhere, such as Grain Corp, Itera, Cargill, rely on precarious seasonal labor. Oh, that seasonal labor is an interesting one. And a lot of them are migrants, a lot of them are women. And again, you see that the gender aspect and the racial aspect in there. Secondary abstraction under capitalism, labor undergoes secondary abstraction. This is secondary abstraction. This is what Marx says, or has worked on it. Reduced to abstract labor through commodification and exchange, making it a homogeneous, exchangeable input within the capitalist system. That is called, Marx calls it just abstraction. But since we have now in our course, we have found another type of abstraction that happens earlier. So we call that primary abstraction, and we rebrand or rename Marxian abstraction as secondary abstraction. It happens after the primary abstraction has happened. Because first you have to have the human creative power turned into labor, and more than human creative power turned into nature. Again, nature is not a positive term. We don't like it. Nature, when we talk about nature, human versus nature, it's a dualism. It's a capitalist dualism. Prior to that, we didn't have that term. If you go to ancient language, rarely you find something, or indigenous, rarely you find something about nature, because people were very much embedded, intertwined with their environment. So nature is a made up term. It's the ecological version of labor. So yeah, so it's more than human creativity that becomes, and livability that becomes nature. Okay, yeah, automation would intensify this abstraction by minimizing the role of human labor and further detaching workers from their creative functions, yet the core process of commodification remains central to labor abstraction. Minimization of human labor. Yeah, there's another source that I found, STEEP 2021, highlights the impact of automated. If you want to address automation, that might be a good one in terms of food production and agriculture. The precarity in food picking and harvesting is also, it's one of the places a lot of actually casualization happens. Migrant workers are employed because it's very seasonal, and because they don't have proper visas, it's only short-term visas, they become exploited heavily, and the companies would love to employ those people. I mean, in terms of this being seasonal, of course, the nature of harvesting is being seasonal, and in prior to capitalism, people of the village used to get mobilized, around the harvest time to do the harvesting, and it had a natural seasonal nature to it, or essence. But under capitalism becomes more specific, because under capitalism you would like to employ people who are not on permanent visa, for instance, and then you can shorten them, then have good access and resources to complain or sue you, etc., etc. You don't need to pay for their possibly their superannuation. Short-term contracting is another one, precarization of labor. A lot of farms are owned by families, but remember that, that's again, as I mentioned before, that family-owned farms can be very, um, you know, deceptional. Is that the right term? because a lot of them are big owners, a family owning thousands of hectares, um, like like um, Gina Reinhardt, the mining magnate. You also have farming magnates, things like that. So yeah, it's not just shareholder companies that play a significant role, or the big players, but also super rich family owners that they can also play a significant role and do a lot of precarization, exploitation of labor and nature, etc., etc. Yeah. Um, on the more than human creativity, again, the fertility of the soil fertility, you can refer to the water. When a lot of water is being, for like in cotton industry, it's very water consuming industry. The use of heavy pesticides, monoculture, they actually deplete the regenerative capacity of the soil, and as the agency of the soil is broken, reduce the ecosystem to simplify production system. You see that this kind of decommunization is happening here on the efficient coast side of it. So ecosystem precarity, that's a very interesting term. So it's a precarity is not just the workers' precarity, but also ecosystem precarity, the biodiversity, soil health, water cycles of the cotton farming ecosystems. It's a lot. There's a lot of. It's just a matter of you choosing which one you want to go. There's a lot of examples, a lot of things that you can talk about uh, when in relation to each one. So I'm not expecting you to cover all of that. It's impossible. I think it's personally I'm kind of getting tempted to maybe write a short book because there's a lot in there, and we can draw on that, and not only the literature, but also there's a good amount of raw data that you can work on. We can go to so many websites, by food sovereignty movements, by farmers movements. If any one of you is interested in doing an honors in this area, maybe your essay can be a base. So if you can possibly expand that essay into a full-fledged honors thesis, um, just expanding it on the back of incorporating more out of the literature, more out of the available information, and you can also think of maybe interviewing a few people on both sides. The workers in being employed by the corporations, maybe. Yeah, on the other hand, the workers that work for a cooperative, or they run their own agroecological farming, or no, you can go to an eco village, have an observation, interview people, see how they create a food system of their own, to what extent that food system is independent from the capitalist system, and to that extent they are true value makers, and to what extent they're connected and integrated into the capitalist system. And that can be a very interesting subject for an honors thesis, and then later maybe a PhD if you're interested. It could be food, it could be energy. And the good thing about both of them, food and energy, they're the top contributors, agriculture and energy production plus transport. They're the top contributors to climate change. And if you want to have a recommendation from me, a suggestion, maybe a very friendly one, for your future, we're deep into a huge mess when it comes to climate change. Try to relate whatever your plans are for future, to climate change, to environment, because we will soon be very in big shortage of experts in that area, because it's so giant. At the moment, we're trying to put a lot of that under the carpet, trying to deal with the climate change through some kind of technocratic institutions like CSIRO. If it is possible to build an AI that can solve climate change, or robots that suck carbon or whatever. machinery that suck. No, that's not going to happen. A lot of human and social elements into it, a lot of ecological elements into it. So future is in dealing with climate change, because climate change is the most significant uh, uh, existential threat to humanity, uh, alongside the looming rising nuclear war that is growing actually as the result of the prolongation of the wars between Russia and Ukraine, which is actually Russia and NATO, and the Middle East. And the Middle East, because one side is the Israeli side has nuclear bombs, and the other side is very much not tempted to go for it. And if that happens, then there will be a huge rivalry between everyone in that region. And already Pakistan has, India has, and also the tensions between China and the United States. You know, for Americans, the primary goal for them is to make sure that whatever war is fought, it wouldn't be fought inside America, and that's why they're interested in our region. And as far as we know, our government's a kind of um, puppet, you know, to the United States, submissive to the United States. It's very likely that the lucky country won't be lucky anymore. So two areas that really, I think two areas that are really, we need experts in it. And we need the kind of experts that are not deceiving themselves by just buying into the BS that the elite is producing. The ones that really are committed to good solutions, proper solutions, real solutions, and they are not only expert but also activists as well. So the future is in being expert activist and very much related to climate change. I really regret that I spend most of my time doing things that were not directly related to climate change. And even if I knew this is coming, I was still kind of uh, distracting myself with personal interests, things that were personally interesting, or what could be more interesting than an existential threat. And when you become familiar with subject, you grow interest. Um, you know, I might be an immigrant suffering from discriminations, and then therefore I think I should do something about it, and I do most of my research in that area. And personally, I was kind of an activist socialist, and then when the Soviet collapsed, it became a big question for me, or what comes next, and that has been driving my projects and research. Again, not kind of indirectly related to climate change, but not directly enough. So I regret it, and I wish I could get back to my youth and do everything differently, because I see that climate change actually it brings a lot of things together. You don't need to when we talk about climate change, we don't need to become expert in you know a geologist or climatologist or whatever it is called. That's not I'm not talking about that aspect of it. I'm talking about the political and the social aspect of it and the ecological aspect of it. Okay, that was again another big footnote. On the livability, yes. So what are the things that we need to consider when we address the livability aspect, which is the material cost? On the true value side, we call it livability. On the capitalist side, we can just call it natural resources or whatever, because they're not seen as livable things anymore. So the definition of livability refers, according to our book, material conditions that enable life to flourish within both human and more than human or non-human communities. It encompasses land, water, biodiversity, human-nature relations that support regenerative. You see that examples are almost the same, but then you say, what are the differences? What if I'm referring to the same examples that are used for the efficient codes, So what makes it different when we're talking about livability? Well, here our focus is not on agency and practice and autonomy. Our focus is on quality of conditions, the material conditions. For instance, you can get this, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Via Campesina was born 1993 in Belgium, around the same time that the Zapatista movement emerged in Mexico, and therefore food sovereignty, land reform, fertile. So they even address gender violence because it's very much embedded in such, especially in for rural Vietnam. So the gender is very important for them. Biodiversity is very important for them. So you can refer to the same examples, but highlight the way they treat or highlight the conditions of the environment, the livability of environment under such practices. So you can again talk about regenerative agriculture, you can talk about agroecology, you can talk about such movement, you can talk about eco-villages, but instead of talking about the agency of the actors, you're not talking about the conditions of the health of the environment, the health of the community, either human or non-human. How healthy it is, how fertile it is, how productive it is, how sustainable the living is under such regimes of true value production versus capitalist value production. We have a few more slides for you to consult. Any questions, any ideas on this aspect maybe? Okay, yes. I have updated this slide, but I think previously I was saying livability is about communal ownership. No, that was wrong here in the second paragraph. Livability, I changed it. I corrected that. Livability depends on communal ownership. It's not about ownership, but when communal ownership is exercised, you expect that the condition would be more livable. The material codes would be more livable. So it depends on. If you, in case you have printed them out, you may correct them. If not, they're there for you to download. The health of soil, water, and biodiversity depends not only on sustainable practices, but on collective decision-making and egalitarian governance. You may say, well, okay, a company is exercising regenerative agriculture, a big company, a capitalist company. So that would make the environment more livable. Yes, no, yes, in terms of it may sustain the things more ecologically speaking, but since it's not collectively owned and the community doesn't have a say in there, it's not egalitarian structure, it lacks those other aspects that is required in order to make livability. Yes, so community supported agriculture, indigenous land. The indigenous practices in the indigenous way of life is the most ideal form, even if it is not as advanced as you would expect. Okay, you want to leave? Okay, that's okay. And you must have received an email asking you to fill out a survey about the course. Please, I appreciate that. I really need, because especially this is the first time I'm teaching it, and I really need your feedback, your input. That really helps, because then I can revise the course for the next year's students. I will really appreciate it. I wanted to spend, because we're encouraged to spend some of our time inside the class to make sure that we would increase the numbers. when a small number of people are doing those surveys, it's either dragged by those who hate it or those who love it too, excessively. So we want to have a good overview. So it will be really appreciated. All the best. So next week, despite the schedule that we were not supposed to have a class, we're going to have a class. So the more you bring, the more ideas, the better. Okay. Thank you. So see you next week. Okay. Well, considering that this is being recorded, hopefully yes, it's being recorded. So, yeah, our friends can watch that later. So how about the primary and secondary abstraction when it comes to livability? How would we formulate that? Yeah, again, remember primary abstraction when we were talking about human creative power, it was turning human creative power to labor that can be exchanged in the market. And the secondary one was extracting value out of the labor that is already incorporated. Now, when it comes to the livability aspect of it, again, it's about turning that ecosystem into resources, into substances, elements that can be incorporated into the system, and then within the system extracting value out of them. That becomes the secondary abstraction by standardizing the products, the substances that goes into the products. So that would become the second abstraction. The second abstraction always is very much dependent on market exchanges. It's through the market exchanges that things become standardized and they become capitalistically or dollar-wise or monetarily or financially valued. So that's why it's called abstractions. You don't pay attention to the story behind the stuff, the qualities that they have, etc., etc. Like the quality of labor. So yes, does that make sense? So yeah, in terms of the primary abstraction, ecological complex like soil, water, biodiversity are stripped from their natural interconnections and repurposed. I think that's a good word, as inputs for maximizing profit. So examples like monoculture farming, Australia's grain and beef industries clears natural ecosystems for single crop systems or expansive grazing lands, ignoring the regenerative capacities of the land. You see that kind of the essence is lost, the livability essence is lost, and they turn into stuff, they turn into substances or resources. And then they become tools or means, if you like, or substances in the hands of capitalist system to further extract value in the form of dollar, in the form of money, and profit out of them that we call secondary abstraction. Exports, imports, anything that has something to do with the market is a central part of the secondary abstraction. Does that make sense? Okay, any questions? Yeah, again, decommunization is happens through those abstractions. We can refer to water resources, examples that I found, Great Artesian Basin. I had no idea what was that. Water privatization and livability. Privatization is one of the central key ways of primary abstractions. When you privatize land, you take a piece of nature and turn it into land. Again, land is a kind of a capitalist term or exploitative term. I mean, it also dates back prior to capitalism. In feudalism, for instance, But still, under feudalism, it was that organic connection with nature and ecosystems were kind of preserved a little bit more. But now under capitalism, it's completely disconnected. It's just land, privately owned land, a property, it becomes a property. The metabolic, have you come across with the word metabolic rift? This is actually a term that Marx invented when many people were not paying much attention to ecology. And by metabolic rift, the reason, I guess, the reason that Marx used the word metabolic is because he was thinking of the material relations between humans and their nature, their environment. And then when it's disrupted and that connection is disconnected, then he calls it a rift. Okay, so metabolic rift, by metabolic rift, for instance, a key example that Marx refers to is the issue of, again, I think soil fertility, I suppose, if I'm not mistaken. I think he refers to soil a lot. Yeah, because a lot of production happens somewhere, consumption happens somewhere else, and that recycling cycle, yeah, the soil fertility is the one that Marx talks about. So again, the production happens in the farms and of the food, and then the food is transferred to the cities, the urban areas, when no planting or no farming happens, and people only consume them, and then they dump the waste, and the waste doesn't find its way back to where the production was happening. And that's why capitalism comes up with fixes like the use of petrochemicals in order to maintain the fertility of land, the fertilizers, right? In massive amount, pesticides, and so those cycles are broken. Whereas in a communist state, you would expect that in a natural state, you would expect that wherever the production happens, the consumption happens, and then the cycle is closed rather than broken. So it doesn't happen cyclical under capitalism. It becomes linear in terms of the metabolic connection between human food production and natural cycles that you would expect in a healthy condition to be the case. Yeah, so many examples of how metabolic rift happens, the environmental degradations. These are the things that we can refer to the livability aspect, because they damage the health of the ecosystems. Now, on the conviviality is the third cause. Yeah, remember, it's the formal cause. It's the kind of a cause that gives form to something. So it's about a structure, a stability. In the case of true value production, it's very much related to the ethics of care work, mutual responsibility between humans and non-humans, and between non-humans as well. So beyond cooperation, and as emphasized in Capital Redefined, conviviality is not just about cooperation, it is about shared agency among all. It's about that sharing aspect. So we started with agency and autonomy, we moved to the conditions, the healthy conditions or unhealthy conditions of the material cause, and now when we get to conviviality, we're talking about the interconnections and interdependence and sharing, and and care. It's the seed commons and seed movements and seed sharing movements are very interesting ones that you can look into as good examples. Vandana Shiva is a very famous woman, ecofeminist, globally known. She's been involved in indigenous seeds protecting them against the big giant corporations like Monsanto, etc., etc. Seed Commons embody conviviality by promoting the shared stewardship of biodiversity. You try to make sure that that diversity of seeds is preserved, because say the corporations have a very big tendency towards monoculture, genetically modified seeds, and of course produces community seed banks in Ethiopia, and you found a reference there. You're welcome to use that. Ethical commitment to resilience. Seed Commons demonstrate a profound ethical commitment to sustaining life through collective stewardship. Again, the issue of stewardship is important here. Yes, stewardship has something to do with agency. It has something to do with livability, but also has something to do with connections. Because the more hierarchical the system is, you can hardly think of it as a system that is based on ethics of care. So when you have a system that is based on ethics of care, it should be horizontal, it can't be hierarchical. And therefore, stewardship is more important than ownership. Again, when you own a piece of land, you have control over it, your relationship with the land is hierarchical. Even if you are running a cooperative, you're part of a cooperative, and that cooperative maybe is kind of non-hierarchical, but it's still, if it is its relationship with the ecological aspect of its resources is a kind of based on ownership and control, you can see that conviviality is kind of disrupted. There's a bit of a conviviality among the workers that own the cooperative and make the decisions collectively and democratically, but if they are engaged in competition with other corporations and they want to expand their business into the capitalist markets and etc., and then try to maximize their profit and etc., see that connection is not a stewardship. It's not about caring about the environment. It's about exploiting the environment, this time collectively and democratically, like the kibbutz in Israel, and the kibbutz communities in Israel seem to be on the surface being run like commons or community-owned things, but they're on other people's land. So there is a settler colonialist situation. So you can run commons on someone else's land, and in a kind of an ownership relationship rather than a stewardship. Yeah, more about conviviality here. CSA programs, these are community supported agriculture. It's communities support farmers and farmers support communities, etc., etc. It's a good thing. It's one of the things that you can see conviviality happening there. But again, as I said, it depends on other aspects as well. It can be also part of self-civilizing aspect of capitalism. Now, primary abstraction and secondary abstraction in relation to conviviality. Again, you can see that in terms of primary abstraction, it's the labor of care or community-based farming are separated from the social foundations and centralized. So it's about alienation, it's about separating. So the care that goes into in a normal conditions, in a communist conditions, happens between humans and non-humans. That care becomes a household care to make sure the household that is now incorporated into the capitalist system can survive, and the worker can go back home. Can go back to work. So you see that the type of care, although we do a lot of care at home, caring for each other, but that care supports the laborer, or our ability to labor for capitalism as value makers. That is very different to when that care happens free from the influence of capitalism. Ideally speaking, of course. And then secondly, abstraction happens when, for instance, that care work is commodified, reduced to transactional exchanges in supermarket, private labels, etc., etc. Um, standards commodities detached from community bonds and and labor involved in their production, producing fetish value. You might have come across, with um, Coles and Woolworths pretending or showing that they do care about communities and they collect donations and etc. etc. So it's again about the civilizing mechanism, co-option of the lost conviviality, but these corporations try to uh, to actually pretend or rebrand themselves and whitewash, I would say. Um, you know, the this apparently on the surface try to compensate for the lost real conviviality, the friendship or connections. Yeah, have a look at that. I kind of running out of time, I guess. And then finally, the alterity, if you may remember, alterity as a means to realize value theory. Alterity refers to the ability of more than human actors to envision and practice alternative modes of living and production that challenge capitalist decommunization. If you may remember, we consider again for alterity, you can refer to those movements. Those movements exercise a lot of I would say, prefigurative emancipatory practices and try to challenge the capitalist system. They want to localize farming, for instance. They want to preserve biodiversity, and they want to change the regulations in favor of, for instance, cooperatives for community-owned and community managed entities, etc., etc. I put some examples here with some references there to them. Yeah, a lot of now about how capitalism actually perverts alterity again through legislations, through policies. The more capitalism takes away the autonomy of the true value makers, the more it hurts their alterity, their ability to sustain themselves, their ability to expand their own initiatives, um, and again you can refer to same examples. Land ownership again is another way where when the land is vastly privately owned, uh, people don't exercise agency, and therefore they can't envision. It would be very difficult for them to envision a different way of living. You talk to many people and they say, yes, capitalism sucks, but what's the alternative? It's hard for them to envision the alternative, and that's one of the ways that capitalism makes sure uh, alterity is disrupted. And here are the references here. Have a look at them. There's some of them have hyperlinks, so you can just click on them. Yeah, towards a post-capitalist politics of food, I can see that this can go well into the alterity aspect, food democracy as well. Precariat is rich. Yeah, sounds like the efficient cause. Automated, we talk about that. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions, or again, until next week, if you come across with any difficulties or there's anything uncertain, just let me know. It's kind of a very big silent. I don't know what's going on. If people are doing many other things, or it's been. But I mean, thinking of what you guys have done already, I think almost everyone was doing well. Um, Maybe we had just one, yeah. Most of the great. I guess some of you are even have passed the course already. Kind of, or very close. You only maybe just need 10 points or maybe 5 points or something like that. But yeah, the final assignment is the final one, 40%, I guess, right? And yeah, I also have to, if I haven't mentioned 8 minimum academic sources, I should, because I think there is a lot there, especially when it comes to food, but you don't need to limit yourself to that 8. You can find anything. I think I might have also put some of the ones that are not, these are only the academic ones, I guess. Um, no, this one was not. Jonas 2021 was not an academic one. It was a website. Food Sovereignty, the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance. It's a good website. You can find a lot of information there. Yes, absolutely. I mean, they have lots of information that you can use the information as the primary data for yourself. You know, here's what the food sovereignty says, or here's what this company says, or here's what those farmers are saying. They're using this kind of practice, and then they're facing these difficulties, etc., etc. Or this is yeah. I mean, Guardian could be a good source. Unfortunately, we can't reference YouTube, but there's a lot of good YouTube things. But you can actually find their people. The people might have also published something. Those who are appear in the YouTubes as experts explaining themselves. But that takes a lot of time finding them. The literature is rich enough. I think I'm now confident, and I think I'm not causing too much problems, at least in food sector aspect of it. But yeah, I mean, I think the energy one, maybe you could take a global one if you're interested in energy. Have you been thinking of any other sector except the food one?
It's kind of hard because I don't know how specific.
Yes.
So I don't want to get too specific to the point where I can't talk about everything.
Yes.
Or,
yes.
I'm trying to keep it broad, and then
Yeah.
throughout my discussion analysis and stuff, sort of talk about briefly the more intricate stuff. Or maybe I might have a focus, or an ongoing example. But
yeah, we don't need to have 10 examples. As far as those elements are addressed, as much as the literature allows, and the other available resources allow. And as far as we get that 2,500 words done, almost 10% below or above, we should be fine. But again, if you have any doubts, any problems, let me know. And yeah, next week we'll see each other again. And I hope I will hear more from you guys. Otherwise, that wouldn't be a good sign. Maybe just after, how many more classes you have for the rest of the week? Okay. Okay. Oh God. And maybe over the weekend. But it's not bad. Whenever you have time, for instance, you sacrifice tonight's Netflix movie. I've been recently watching Sheldon, which is very interesting. Have you watched that? Yeah, that's a very funny one. Yeah, I mean that maybe we should sacrifice a bit of that and then spend maybe 1 extra hour tonight. Just I want to see if I can find a few interesting resources for my essay. That's all. Just 1 hour finding a few resources. Tomorrow night, 1 extra hour, another 1 hour maybe. Maybe I can write something about out of the resources I found last night. Something like that. And then maybe over the weekend. I don't know. Do you work over the weekends or? Oh, oh my God.
I'm the same. I usually work from about 4 p.m. until sometimes midnight, but
Wow.
it depends on the issue.
Okay. Wow. Wow. And doing 4 courses. Oh my God, you guys are heroes. Yeah, I know, I know. But that explains why so many people don't turn up. Wow.
I could only like around like between 15 and 25 hours of work a week. But then obviously I was on study. So, and there's about 40 hours of study.
Wow.
Sometimes 30 but yeah, so it's like a 60-hour work week really. Yeah.
Yeah, my God. So I mean, because I mean, officially they assume that every full-time student is spending 40 hours a week of a study. But if you're working at the same time, that's
Yeah, I mean, otherwise, it's like it's just kind of finding a balance between it. But it's either 40 hours